Hello to everybody. I'm going to present the state of the art in our work package 7. This work package is the only package that focuses on physical activity within STOP. We have a few deliverables. It's the easiest way to show you what we're doing through deliverables. We have already accomplished most of them. So the first two are related to systematic review and evidence synthesis. This means that we reviewed publications on the effectiveness of various interventions in the area of physical activity, physical fitness, and sedentary behavior, and tried to analyze what worked best, what the evidence says. And then in deliverable 7.3 and 7.4, we seized the opportunity to analyze the effectiveness of the healthy lifestyle intervention in Slovenia. Why this intervention? Because it's one of the largest interventions of physical activity in the world. It was implemented in all across the country. And of course, to have these big numbers of children followed for a couple of years, because this intervention was also quite long. It lasted for from 2011 to 2018. It was possible to observe the long-term changes that could be resulted by the intervention itself. Then the fifth deliverable we are going to produce, I mean, it's close to be finished and submitted, is the report on the requirements and barriers to implementation of healthy lifestyle intervention in other countries. So what are possible barriers to implement this kind of intervention, not the same, but this kind of intervention in other countries, because all the countries have their specificities. They have different educational systems, different teachers in schools, different ways and different systems of tackling childhood obesity. So I'll just present what our deliverables so far showed. The first two deliverables were focused on effectiveness of interventions on obesity. So we tried to compare the interventions that were focusing on sedentariness with interventions who were focusing on physical activity, with the interventions that were focusing on physical fitness. This has already been published in obesity reviews, and it was a very hard work because we had hundreds and hundreds of papers of researchers on the effects of different interventions on obesity. At the end, we selected 146 studies to be included that fulfill all the criteria for the analysis. They were all school-based, included children from age 6 to 12, and we are looking at the changes of BMI, BMI Z-score, and percentage of body fat. So first we looked at how different kinds of interventions worked. And here you can see this table with very small numbers. You don't bother reading all of them, but it's in the upper left corner you have interventions focusing on physical activity, in the right upper corner for fitness. On the lower right left corner you have the interventions that were including physical activity and sedentary behavior, and in the right bottom corner you have fitness and sedentary behavior. It has to be emphasized that interventions that were focusing only on sedentary behavior were very scarce, and also the ones that were focusing on fitness and sedentary behavior were very scarce. But what our results showed is that the most effective interventions in regard of tackling childhood obesity were the ones that were focusing on fitness. The second ones were the ones that were focusing on physical activity interventions. And interestingly, the ones that were focusing on physical activity and sedentary behavior at the same time were not as effective as the previous two. And also the ones that were focusing on fitness and sedentary behavior were not as effective as the interventions focusing on fitness or physical activity alone. So if this table you see, this chart that you see is only the chart on percentage of body fat, but you have similar results also in BMI and BMI Z-score. So this is something that we learned, and it's important for the further implementation of similar interventions. You know, we really have to find the best possible solutions and have to find scientific evidence of what works best, and this has to be the basis of the future policies and interventions. We looked also at gender inequalities. So this is when we looked at all the interventions combined. And what we saw is that the interventions were more effective in girls than in boys, in all the indicators. But then we looked at different kind of interventions. So on interventions on physical activity, interventions that were focusing on physical activity and sedentariness, and the ones that were focusing on physical fitness only. And what we saw is that basically the interventions that were focusing on physical activity were more effective in girls, but the interventions that were focusing on physical fitness were more effective in boys. This probably has to do something with the upbringing of children, you know, the gender roles, etc. But it has to be further further researched. But we could see that probably not everything works best for everybody. So the second message is that probably we'll have to diversify our interventions to be more successful than they have been in the past. And then we analyzed how the interventions affected children from higher socioeconomic standard class and lower one. So we looked at socioeconomic inequalities. This is the combined effect of all kind of interventions. And we saw that that all the interventions were more effective in children from higher socioeconomic groups than from lower socioeconomic groups, which means that probably, you know, the environment itself is very strong in influencing childhood obesity, and that probably the interventions should incorporate larger area than they did. And when we looked at the types of interventions that were more or less effective, we could see that again, it was shown that in higher socioeconomic children from higher socioeconomic environments, it was more successful. So the physical activity and physical fitness interventions were more effective on BMI. On the Z-score of BMI, it was similar in higher and lower socioeconomic groups. But if we looked at the effect of the physical activity and sedentariness and physical fitness and sedentariness interventions, we saw that they were more effective in higher socioeconomic children from higher socioeconomic groups. So we now have some directions towards which we should be working in the future, and of course future challenges in analyzing more evidence as it is produced. And if we now move to the second part, to the healthy lifestyle and studying the effectiveness of the healthy lifestyle intervention, this was an intervention that was going on in Slovenia between 2011 and 2018. This intervention had no focus on reduction of childhood obesity. To be clear, this was not intended to reduce childhood obesity. It was intended to improve their physical fitness by increasing their physical activity. And we tried to see what the side effects were. So what was the collateral effect on childhood obesity? In the first study, which we studied only the effectiveness, we studied the difference between the control cohort and intervention cohort. You can see that these were both big cohorts, 34,000 children, 29,000 children. And we were following the same children for 5 years. So we analyzed the children who were in intervention only 1 year, and the ones who were 2 years, and the ones who were 3 years, and after 4 years and 5 years. And we could see that the odds of being obese was declining in intervention cohort in comparison to control cohort, despite the fact that this was not focused on reducing childhood obesity, but it did help. And you can see that in the 5 years, there was quite a large difference already. But we could also see that 1 year intervention doesn't make a big difference. So an important message is that short-term interventions usually don't have big effects. So we shouldn't expect much from short-term interventions, and we should look at the longer at the interventions who have longer durations. And if you looked at the reduction of the prevalence of obesity, you can see the control cohort in orange and pinkish, and the intervention cohort in green. And you can see that in the control cohort, basically, we didn't have any changes in obesity prevalence, but there have been some changes in the intervention group. And in the second analysis, we also wanted to put some money on the intervention. So what the effect could mean for in regard of money, how much would we save by this? And we analyzed the cost effectiveness by analyzing how the intervention affected children who had normal weight before the intervention, who had pre-obesity, and who had obesity before the start of the intervention. So we looked at different groups of children, and we saw that the BMI change was bigger in experimental groups, in all three groups, in boys and in girls. Not all differences were statistically significant, but most of them were. And you can see that the difference was present in all 5 years. Of course, when you're looking at these long-term effects, you have to acknowledge that children are growing in this time, that they are changing, that they are developing, and this is always interfering with the effects. But nevertheless, the results were quite visible.
Sorry to interrupt, Gregor. We need to wrap up again.
Yes, sure. I'm almost finished. So at the end, we also looked at the cost effectiveness when we looked at cases reversed. So how many cases were reversed, how many cases of children with obesity have been reversed, and we can see that with duration of intervention, that the number of reversed cases increased. And then we looked at possible savings, and possible costs of the reversing the obesity cases, and we saw that there are quite big differences. Okay, in boys, we couldn't have this analyzed in year 1 because in year 1 the number of reversed obesity cases in control group was a bit slightly higher than in control group, in intervention group. So we couldn't analyze it there, but you could see that it costs a lot if you want to reverse obesity in 1 year or in 2 years, and this cost goes down as the intervention lasts. So this, in short, what we found out until now. Of course, we adapted to the situation because of COVID. It hit us after the project started, and we are preparing also additional deliverables. One of them is almost prepared, and it shows how the effect of lockdowns and measures influence children's development, their obesity. So we have one very robust study now analyzing 2 cohorts with the pre and post, so before and after COVID, and the results are striking and show that we really have a big problem on our hands now, and we'll have to put all our scientific research work into finding best solution.